Mr. Nugwide, there are those who would say there is the politics of the budget, and then there is the activity or the functionality of that budget. Let's have a conversation around some of those with Mr. Wale Smato-Unide, who is DG Nigeria Employers Consultative Association, NECA. Thank you for joining us this morning.
Thank you. Good morning.
Well, you have been quoted as saying that while there are some sectors of the Nigerian economy that are critical, one budget cycle cannot really address all of the challenges.
Absolutely.
Be that as it may, speak to one of the things that Mr. Nigwide just raised now, that if only we could have some form of sustainability in our developmental agenda, some vision that, okay, for education over the next 20 years, this is what's going to be doing, so that no matter what government comes in, that is what would happen. Do you see that happening anytime soon?
Well, good morning once again. I think Sheung basically laid the foundation for the conversation that I really wanted to have with you. And the points he made, they are quite succinct and they are quite fundamental to whatever we want to achieve as a country. It's less of what you want to do as an individual, because what has happened over time, even within the context of national development plans. If you check the whole national development plans that we've had, hardly can you point to one of those development plans that at the expiration of, at the terminal date of that development plan, that we did a proper evaluation to see, have we really achieved this national development plan, which spoke to the issue of the short-termism. A government comes in, come up with their own agenda, they run with that agenda, another government comes in, they will start another kind of agenda. So it's more of focusing on what the individual or the individual administration want to do rather than what a government can actually do. We're open, we can't stop open, because worst case scenario, we have 8 years of the New Hope agenda. Probably somebody else will come in 7 years' time or 8 years' time and come up with another kind of agenda, and that is one of the roots of the problem we have. With the nature of our economy, the nature of our developmental state, you need a sustained growth pattern, a sustained trajectory beyond 4 years, beyond 8 years, beyond 12 years. You need a sustained growth pattern, which every sector will grow on. You spend 1 billion on education this year, you spend another 1 billion next year. You have to maintain that traction for you to have that foundation. We don't have now.
One of the issues that has also been raised, picking from what you just said now about not being able to track our national development plans, is that of even the budgets. Do you think over the years, let's stick with just this Fourth Republic, that over the years we've been able to track the performance of our budgets to say, okay, this budget performed creditably well, so then let us increase whatever it is that we need to do?
The tracking at the government level might be suspect, but we have with organizations like budget and also instrumentalities of the private sector, we're able to come up with certain parameters to check. And sometimes you also realize when you come up with your own parameters, you come up with your assessment, you lose your own independent assessment, they're always met with some kind of resistance from those in government or either the ministries or the agency, because sometimes it doesn't align with the parameters or the assessment that they have done, which is okay. So for us, I think it's the root of the matter, and we've advocated over time that you don't just draw up a budget or you don't draw up a policy. If you draw up a policy that will affect critical stakeholders, then it is imperative that you involve those stakeholders at the process of formulation, at the process of implementation, and also at the process of evaluation of that policy, whether they are working or not. If you screen out stakeholders, those that the policy will affect, either Nigerians, other institutions, if you take them out of the context of the formulation, you take them out of the context of implementation, then your whole process is suspect, because there's no independent body that can do evaluation to know whether that policy has worked or not.
But another challenge in that regard is that, according to the DG of the Budget Office, we have more than 1,500 ministries, departments, and agencies of the federal government alone. And those will come with one budget or the other. So when we talk about these critical, sectors, education, health, and all those things, these are the nuts and bolts in the engine of government that's going to get all of these done. But let's speak to the critical sectors. You talked about the fact that we cannot stop hoping. That gladly or so, perhaps, the president says that this is the renewed hope, budget of renewed hope. Yeah. Looking at the budget lines, how hopeful are you that even if this one budget cycle doesn't move the needle much, at least it is in the way of achieving that? How hopeful are you?
Before I take your question, the issue of I'll call the proliferation of ministries, agencies, and departments. I think there is this Orosori report that streamlines agencies, that try to reduce duplication. And that report was submitted, was submitted with a lot of fanfare. And the expectation was that the report would be implemented, but up till today, there has not been full implementation of that report. We don't even know if it's still where it's supposed to be. Now, coming back to the budget items, and she also mentioned it succinctly. If the fundamentals are wrong, then there is hardly any hope for you to achieve the plan that you have, And consistently, we've said you cannot continue to feed the cause and keep complaining about the effect. If your pattern has been wrong over time and you've not achieved the kind of growth that you anticipate, then it's expected that you take a critical look at those patterns and those allocations to see if this has not worked for me over time. It is time for me to do things differently. Now, looking at the budget currently, while we've not seen the whole details of the lines, but looking at it holistically as it is, it calls for a lot of concern. While the minister was sharing his perspective about the budget, he raised certain critical issues at the beginning. He called them introduction, and he said there are issues with domestic revenue mobilization, public debt sustainability, elevated inflation, challenging domestic business environment, infrastructure, forest, and many other things. Now, the expectation is that the budget, being a planning document, will, to some extent, address those issues that you've identified as very critical. Now, the question is the budget we've seen, both the supplementary that was earlier passed and the budget, the whole budget as we see it, are they speaking to these critical issues? The president mentioned the issue of transparency, accountability, fiscal responsibility. With the track of expenditure line that we've seen, the 1.2 billion that you mentioned, the 15 billion for the VP's house. So many of those expenditure lines, the humongous amount budgeted for, approved for the cars of the senators, of those of NAS, does that speak to fiscal discipline? Within the context of the realities of what an average Nigerian is facing and what the organized businesses are currently facing. If they are not speaking to it, I think it's time for government to look back at those expenditure lines and let us take a very deep look or have a very deep conversation concerning the issue of fiscal discipline. If you take out fiscal discipline from the context of what you have provided, then we'll keep running in circles.
Question then will be, who should be taking these on? One of the things that have always bugged my mind is why, approve another budget when we haven't quite taken stock of the previous one. We'll take that and a number of other issues on when we return from this break. Just stay with us. Well, Well, we're still talking about some of the issues being raised concerning the budget that the president presented to the National Assembly. Well, Mr. Smatoyinri, so here we are looking at some of the critical sectors, education, health, and all of that. The defense takes prominence. There are those who have said that the reason for insecurity is unemployment and poverty. So we seem to be, from what we have of the budget, we seem to be focusing on solving a problem that is still existing. There are those who think maybe we should have paid a lot more attention to capital infrastructure and a number of other things that will encourage the private sector to produce, to be more productive, to create an employment and all those things, as opposed to fighting a problem that is still there where we don't seem to be doing enough to solve the problem. What do you think of that?
Well, it still comes back to the issue of feeding the cause and complaining about the effect. You know, as you said, rightly so, if you take unemployment out of the context and you have majority of your citizens gainfully employed, then you have invariably resolved a lot of economic issues, including unemployment. You have resolved a lot of issues even that the nation itself will have. Because once you keep the wheel of production and consumption going, you have put yourself in the path of growth. Security, defense having a large chunk of the budget is just dealing with the issue from the effect context. You know, let's do more with education. You know, let government focus more on issues concerning infrastructure. Let's focus on empowering the private sector. Look, nobody is interested in palliatives. You know, an average Nigerian, you know, talking about palliatives every other time is sometimes can be quite vexatious. You know, rather than talking about palliative, rather than talking about grants, you know, why not let's focus on those items that will enable the private sector to operate without much hindrance? Why not let's focus on the regulatory, the legislative environment that will enable organized businesses not only to expand, not only to thrive, but to create jobs. The moment you focus on creating jobs, then you have resolved to a large extent the issue of unemployment. We are not really at war, you know, and we are not anticipating war. So rather than deal with them, continue to pump such enormous money into those areas that are not our priorities. Why not let's focus on what exactly are our priorities within the context of the next 3-4 years? And we think our priorities should be deepening infrastructure development, focusing on the issue of health. We lost the opportunity during COVID. If you remember, billions and billions and billions came into this country, either through grants, whether through support, whether through private sector contribution, to upscale our health facility. But we lost that opportunity, and now we're back to ground zero. And then focus on the issue of education. If we deal with those critical issues, then we have put ourselves back on the trajectory of growth.
How significantly do you think this budget can start us off on that journey? You said one budget cycle cannot address these critical sectors, and you know a number of people will agree with you. But how significantly do you think this budget is addressing or has taken the bull by the horn in laying a path for economic growth?
It hasn't really done much. You know, what we urge government to do is to listen to critical stakeholders that are making submissions, that are asking questions. You know, you should take those feedbacks as constructive feedbacks to enrich the budget before the National Assembly passes it. Let's go back to the items, the line items. Which of these line items should not be a priority for us as a nation?
Which of them are vexatious for you?
We've spoken about the issue of, without belaboring it, the 1.2 billion is actually in the supplementary budget, which also feeds into all this context. But without mentioning vexatious issues, but priority for us, let me go to the priorities, is infrastructure. You know, we need to enable the private sector through critical infrastructures. Power sector needs a lot of support. We need to focus on private sector support within the context of of power. We need to focus on education, because for the private sector, is the outcome of the educational sector that feeds into the private sector within the context of skills and manpower. So we need to focus on education, we need to focus on health, and we need to focus on critical infrastructure. For the private sector, those are key issues. And those items that we've seen, that we are brandishing around, the 15 billion for renovation, the renovation of the dam, those items can be plugged back into these critical issues, so that we can put ourselves back in that position where we say we have laid a foundation, a true foundation for our growth in the next 4 years.
Every time we talk about budgets, we talk about the federal government. But states also present budgets to their state houses of assembly. While a lot of attention is on the federal government, the presidency, from doing the right things and all, we seem to give less attention to states, where the real work of development happens, where the Nigerians actually live. How significant is that for you? What do you think? And then perhaps also speak in the same vein of collaboration between federal government and states, so that the dividends of democracy, as we call them, can actually get down to the grassroots.
Someone said Nigeria is a big conspiracy. When it's convenient, we talk of federalism, that the states should do their thing, or the regions should do their things. When it's not convenient, or when it's not serving our purpose, we say, look, it's federal government. And also, if you look at the line items for some of the state government's budget, you realize the humongous amount budgeted for governance, for state house management, and those are quite big issues we've raised. And also, if you just oppose the debt, the quantum of debt that the states are owing with the federal government, they're probably contesting. So it's also a big issue for the state, and I think it's time for citizens, basically, citizens and critical stakeholders in those states, and also in the local governments, to take a different approach to asking questions. I think Nigerians should also take a different approach to being much more assertive within the context of governance. If not, the state governments, the local governments will keep, they will continue to get away with murder within the context of the kind of expenditure, the expenditure aids that they incur, the way they spend their money. I think fiscal discipline can also be said to be worse at the state level, because attention is not given to that group, to the state levels, and we are all focusing on the issue of the federal government. So rightly said, a lot of things are happening in the states that if you open it up, you might just find out that the rot in the federal government might just be a child's play.
In that same context, perhaps lastly, let me ask you, so how should the citizens, indigents, residents of those states take this charge up on their own to call their state governments particularly to account? How do you suppose that they could go around about that, and how significant would that be in ensuring that money is actually well spent?
Now, we will advocate more citizen education, and the civil societies can play a big role in this. We will not advocate for mass protests. We are not an advocate of mass protests. We are not an advocate of mass demonstration, but citizens. Each senatorial district have a senator. There are House of Rep members in each state. Now, what are we doing as citizens to engage those that we have sent to Abuja, or to engage those that we have sent to the capital to represent us? That is the point where the engagement needs to start. If my House of Rep member in my local government, if it was part of those that sat and approved 100 billion to buy cars for members, I should be able to go to the constituency office and ask questions. But the moment we keep quiet and assume it doesn't matter, or the moment I am part of those that are benefiting from the rot in the system, then I'm already compromised. And that's how we say the whole system seems like a big conspiracy, where everybody's hands has been dipped whether rightly or wrongly, in the cookie jar, and your capacity to actually advocate or your capacity to actually raise fundamental questions is compromised. So it goes back to citizens' education. Everybody must start asking questions, constructive questions, not questions to, not emotional questions as well, but constructive questions that eat to the heart of our development. Until we start doing that, and until Nigerians also start taking that critical step of asking these fundamental questions, then we'll probably not move forward.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much this morning for being a part of our conversation. It's been, I don't know, I guess it's just saying to us that there's a lot more to be done.
Absolutely.
That we have even started. Wale Smatoyorinde, DG Nigeria Employers Consultative Association, NECA, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for always having us here.
We've always also had Olusegun Onigbede, co-founder and director, Budget. He joined us virtually. Thank you so much. We're back right after now to take on another issue. Dealt with it before. Let's do it again. We'll be right back.